Everybody, thanks for coming back to Stars of the Diamond. So in a much anticipated follow-up video to the video I posted a few weeks ago about the 1915-1921 ZEENUT album, the cards have now been soaked, and it's a lengthy process to get the cards out. It's not something for the those that don't have patience. So I can talk a little bit as I go through this video about how I got the cards out, but what you see in front of you is sort of the fruits of the labor. And as you can kind of see, most cards have been removed, although there are a few cards that I did not take off the album page. And I have another stack as well that I didn't bother to take off the album page. But so here's kind of the cards themselves laid out for sort of that thumbnail image. But I was able to get that checklist out, and you can kind of see that in the back there. You can see the ZEENUT or the Colgan's cards in the back. And we got our 1921 ZEENUTs, 1920, 1919, 18, 17, and most of the 16s and 15s and those die-cut 1917s I did not take off. But so you can kind of see right here what we have. And the one card I have not yet soaked is the 1919 Fatty Arbuckle. And you can kind of see the process of separating each card. This one I was able to remove some of the back material before. I kind of liked that article about Fatty Arbuckle being blamed for the poor treatment of the visiting St. Paul team to the Mini World Series. But this card actually, when I bought that album, I bought it with my brother Reese, who many of you know as the president of RMY Auctions. And this Fatty Arbuckle card is actually going to Reese because I already have a pretty nice example of it. So this was the main card that he was in search of. So I am going to let him do the soaking on that one. I don't want to damage his card. So, but other than that, I pretty much removed all the other cards. One I did not bother to do was this 1915 Harry Heilman, just because I did not know if this card was going to survive the soaking process. It's so damaged, there's so much wear to it that I just wasn't confident that it was going to make it. And this card I was able to get, the newspaper articles off the back without damaging them. And so I think it kind of presents all right as it is right here. So I'm probably not going to be doing any further soaking on that card. And I'm going to kind of show you real quick. So that really, really thick album now has been reduced to sort of another version of itself. And in here, I did not take out those pages that had the die-cut cards. So there's those pages still in place. And, for the most part, I think there's a couple more cards kind of in a spot or two here and there. But for the most part, I left the album alone. The picture of the original owner is still in the album. I tried to preserve as much kind of in situ as I could, and I was able to find out that the original owner, his name was Bob Dunn. So this is officially what I'm going to be calling the Bob Dunn Collection. And he did a great job back in the day. I haven't looked him up on Ancestry.com or anything like that to find out more about him. But I am very appreciative of the care that he took to preserve this collection. Otherwise, it would have been lost to the world. But in addition to all the cards that we have there, I have a small mountain of the newspaper articles that were able to be preserved. And there is literally, I have been doing, when I haven't been removing the cards from the album, I'm not going to lie, I've been reading through these so much, and it's pretty awesome. So we've got some really great, they soak out really well. If you ever soak, the first thing that's going to come loose are the newspaper articles. It literally takes maybe 10, 20 seconds of being in the water before the glue started to allow these to just kind of float right off. So a little bit of bleeding of the ink, but for the most part, nothing damaged. And in the entire process of soaking that album, there was a couple newspaper articles that were damaged that were kind of triple packed on top of each other. But other than that, there was no actual casualties. So all in all, a really, really successful soaking here. So some of the cooler newspaper articles that we got. And that one I'm going to set aside. Got a great one of Ty Cobb. Here's the 1919 World Champion Cincinnati Reds. And again, there's another Bob Dunn writing his name on it. But there's a cool Babe Ruth. But anyways, there was an article in there that there is a member of the Net 54 family, Ken McMillan, who has I think it's his great uncle that was a member of the 1921 New York Yankees, I believe. And he collects his cards. And I was able to find an article that I'm going to be sending to him. And I think it's great. I think no one in the world is going to appreciate this article more than him. But it's talking about Elmer Miller is the guy's name. And it's talking about Elmer Miller being the world's greatest fly chaser. So says Lefty O'Doul, his teammate. And just a really great article. It's kind of the full size here. And I'm going to be sending that to Ken just because there's no one in the world that's going to appreciate that more than him. So Ken, contact me on Net54. If you don't watch this, I will find you and I will get that out to you. But as we can kind of see, here's our stacks. And I'm going to go over a little bit of the cards that I didn't soak. Here is that other Fatty Arbuckle. I kind of left it on. It's die cut around the image. I actually kind of like it as it is, just like this. I'm probably going to keep it this way. I already have this card, so I think I might be working a trade or something like that with someone for it. But I kind of like it as it is. The original owner writing Arbuckle, owner Vernon right below it. So kind of cool as it is. So I'm probably not going to be doing any more soaking on that. Some other cards that, so these cards, some things are falling. So the cards in the holders here, these ones they were already out. I got the Johnny Evers was already out. All these ZEENUT cards, those were already out before. There's that ticket. And in addition, we had a Frank Chance 1916 that's been trimmed and a 1916 Swede Risberg. So those two are still on the scrapbook page. Could easily be removed. I just didn't do that. I think they're fine as they are. And in addition to that, a lot of the 1915s and 1916s I did leave on the pages, and they were in pretty poor shape, so I didn't want to risk soaking those. So those I have kind of separated out and left on the page, so you can kind of see they're in probably about as good a condition or anything as I can hope for. So those are going to stay kind of in the condition that they're in. No reason, I don't think it adds anything to take them off the original scrapbook page. But anyways, so without further ado, I'm going to pause this video real quick, and I'm going to kind of start going through a little bit of the actual collection, but just wanted to give you sort of a snapshot of the collection itself here. All right, well, I am back, and I was able to get a lot of the cards, the more key cards, into some holders and everything like that. But before I kind of get into the actual cards that we got in this collection, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the soaking process. I had a lot of people reach out to me as I was getting ready to do this project and ask me about how it was done. And I think I'm just going to kind of briefly go over. I don't want to go into the details just because I don't want to tell somebody something wrong and be responsible for somebody ruining a prize card or something like that. So I'm just going to tell you exactly how I do it. So anyways, with cards and, you know, with the checklist, for example, one of the hardest parts about getting that checklist out was the fact that there were cards both on the front and on the back. So card stock itself is very hard for water to penetrate. And so if you have an item that's just on one side of paper and it's pretty porous paper, that's going to soak very, very well. But if you have a card on one side, glue, paper, more glue, and another card on the back, that's going to be very, very hard for that water to get to the glue. And in this case, it was very water soluble, to get to that glue to basically cause that glue to start to break down and release the card from the paper. So in a case like that checklist, I had to remove some of the cards specifically on the back of it, of the paper that it was on, because otherwise the water would not be able to penetrate in and it would have worn away in certain areas or would have broken down because of too much exposure to water. So what you want to do with cards is you want to try out some cards that are pretty damaged first. So I have some here that I did, and there were some cards, you know, and you can kind of see here's some of my tester cards that we did. And so these cards, this guy obviously is missing a head, so no value at all whatsoever in him. I kind of soaked him out just to kind of see potentially what the glue type was, and it was very water soluble. But then there was also a portion where I had this card and this card right over the top of each other, just like that. And so where those two cards were, I could try to soak both of these cards out simultaneously and see how that worked. And it ended up working okay. These cards, as we can kind of see, I'm going to try to get it so that we can kind of see the surface. These cards had a little bit of damage to them. I think the 1921 actually came out a lot better. Very flat stock here. And what I actually found with this collection is that some of the 1918s and 19s had previously been in one album, taken out and put in this album. So this was obviously the second incarnation. And we found that out after, because so that card there was not that way. So that's really, really nice. But then this card right here, you can see has some back damage to it. And that back damage was there before, from the get-go. So there was no way that was going to come out without that back damage, because that had previously been in an album. It had been torn out, damage done, glue put in, and put into this album. Whereas this card right here did not. So it has no damage on the back. So half of the 1919s and about half of the 1918s kind of had that damage. So you really have to take it year by year. Each of these years were slightly different. 17s and 18s are on thicker cardstock and were actually soaked better, but they also took more time to dry. 19s were a little bit tougher. I was a little bit worried about the gray fading a little bit. It didn't really do that. 1920s were very easy to get out. These have a nice glossy stock on the back. The paper stock that these are on is very nice and really, really easy to soak out. And so those turned out great. The 1921s actually were probably some of the harder ones, and they turned out pretty great, but they discolored quite a bit when you got the water on them. And so the first couple that I did from 1921, I was really worried about the cardstock just starting to break down and fall apart on me. But once we started to dry those, they went right back to the white cardstock that we're used to. And the cards on the edges that were, you know, more prone to wear over the years wore more. And so they would actually discolor more on the edges. It's not really evident anymore from, you know, what they were, but when they were soaking, it was a little bit just nerve-wracking to do that. But so each year you kind of have to treat differently. And every single time you soak, it's going to be different. So how I do it, I know a lot of people get into distilled water and everything like that. I use warm water. warm to hot water, because the quicker that you can break down that glue solid, the better. If you're leaving things in lukewarm or tepid water for way too long of a time, you risk breakdown of the actual paper. And I live in Idaho, and it's pretty dry environment here, so cards tend to dry quicker for me than they would if you were living in somewhere like Florida where it's very humid. And that's just kind of the way it is. But the biggest thing when you're soaking items, or if you're trying to preserve items, is to take your time. Don't throw them in front of a fireplace. Don't try to dry them too quickly, because you run the risk of causing warping or waving, and we don't want that. So we really have to take our time, because when we have cards, naturally we want them to look flat. You just want them to have a nice flat, even look to them. If you've got wave to them, oop, there goes a card. If they have a waviness to them, everyone can tell that they've been soaked. I'm not doing this to, kind of, trick anybody or anything like that. But it becomes very, very obvious that a card has been soaked if it has that kind of wavy texture to it. And typically what that'll be the result of is trying to dry them too quickly. So from start to finish, each card that was in this collection was soaked. And for about 3 days, 3 to 4 days, I would keep them in paper towels. And every day, at least once, sometimes twice, I would change out the paper towels. And I would lay them flat, 9 to a paper towel a piece, and put another paper towel on top, 9 more cards right on top of each other. And usually I take like a pretty thick, like Robert Edward Auctions catalog, and place it on top of them. You don't want too much pressure, so you don't want to put like 100 pounds on there. You just want some pressure to keep things flat. And each day when you change out that paper towel, it's going to feel a little bit more dry. And once we kind of have, instead of sort of a floppy feel to the card, once it starts getting that normal kind of card stock feel to it, at that point, and only that point, do I take it out of the paper towel. And then I put them in a stack, make sure there's no tackiness or stickiness to them. And I will take them in a stack probably about that size or so. And I actually just use graded card holders, or these are kind of my two go-to, these ginormous card holders from the 90s. And these weigh about 2 pounds a piece. And I will put the cards in just like this. Place this one on top. We get a pretty nice flat texture to it, and rubber bands on each side, not super tight, just enough to kind of keep that. And for about 3 or 4 more days after that, every day I will go through and I will just make sure the cards aren't sticking, and just kind of change the order of them, so that some cards are on top, get put to the middle, and you're just flipping them around so that every card gets kind of an equal pressure. You're allowing some air to kind of get in there. It's not airtight. And after about a week, really it does take about a week, you can have cards that have just that normal, natural bow to them. And they'll stay that way. They won't kind of get all weird and warpy on you. So that's kind of my process. I'm sure there's better ways to do that. I've never seen any breakdown or anything like that. But that's my process for, kind of getting these cards. Now, what I found when I was soaking in years past, when I first started doing this, I would always notice I'd be way more fastidious about the Hall of Famers or the stars. And I would find myself almost ruining the cards because I was so worried about, ruining a particular card. So if I was doing, for example, let's just use the example of this Lefty O'Doul. I would always find that if I was soaking a Lefty O'Doul card versus, a common, the common would turn out great, and then the Hall of Famer would end up with slight back damage or some warping or something like that. And I really found that I was messing with the stars too much because I was too worried. And so what I have found myself doing and I'm not necessarily advocating this for anybody else. I put all the cards in a stack and I turn them backwards, and I treat every single card the same. And when I'm soaking and when I'm cleaning off the glue and doing what I do, I don't know if I'm dealing with a $50 common, a $20 common, or a, you know, couple $1,000 Fatty Arbuckle card. So I treat every single card the same, and I get what would be an ideal result. And I just treat every single card as if it's a nice card, but I don't get too fastidious about the stars. And I found that once I kind of switched to doing it that way, things soaked a lot better. And so I've had a lot more success. And so that's what I did. Every single time I would do a batch. And you do have to take your time. With this, I would do maybe 40 to 50 cards a day, you know, when I was actually soaking. No more than that. If you start throwing hundreds of cards in the bath at the same time, you're not going to get to that first card that you put in time for it not to be potentially damaged and in the water for too long, too much exposure. So that's kind of my process. And after 3 or 4 days of being in kind of between the heavy bricks, they're pretty good. They're super dry. They don't feel wet anymore. There's no moisture. And again, I'm in Idaho, so it's a very dry environment here. So it tends to dry quicker for me. When I used to live up in the Northeast, it was a lot more humid and wet, and things would take longer. Okay, so give it some time, let it be. When I first started doing it, I would leave them in a really thick book. Some of those auction catalogs work really well. But again, you don't want to put it into a book or anything like that with any moisture still in the card. Because what's going to happen is that when that card's sitting in that book, that moisture is going to leach out from the card into the book, and it's going to cause the pages of the book to get that wave or warp. And then your card, when you come to it a couple weeks later to see it, it's going to have a permanent warp, and you're going to have to start all over again and re-soak it and potentially risk damage. So that's kind of my process. Again, I don't want to go too far into it and show examples because, again, I don't want to be responsible for ruining anybody's card. But that's my process. Everybody probably has a slightly different process in how they do that. But anyways, so that's that. Don't want to go too far into that, but so now we're going to kind of switch gears a little bit, and we're going to talk about the actual cards that we got here. Okay, so this is going to be a long video. I don't care. Okay, this is kind of one of those once in a lifetime type collections, and I don't care if I spend 30 minutes or an hour on this. You can tune in, you can fast forward to what you want to watch, but I'd advise anybody, if they want to see the whole collection, stick around, pause it, come back to it, and it'll be worth it. So total cards in this collection, we got, to start off, 13 and a half tin tops, Colgan's tin tops, and I'll explain the half. And E121 W575-1, we got 3 cards. And then with the ZEENUT cards, and I'm not including any of those trimmed cards. There's quite a bit of the trimmed ones and things like that in this collection. I didn't include those into the total, okay? So of the cards that were complete, the ones that you see out in front of us right now, 1917, there were 18 cards. 1918, there were 82 cards. 1919, 143. 1920, 111. 1921, 112. If my math is correct, that gives us 466 cards total, not including any of those trimmed 1917s, none of the 1915s or 16s that were all kind of trimmed away and everything. Just complete cards, 466. So overall total in the collection, over 500 cards. And so let's start with the non-ZEENUT cards. So with the Colgan's tin tops, I was able to get, if anyone watched that first video, the Eddie Walsh card was stuck on the front of another card, and I was able to get that Eddie Walsh card off. However, it had back damage on the back of it already. So I think it had been one of the ones that had been torn out, and it got glued on the front of another card. I can't remember which card in here it was, but it you know, had some back damage. So anyways, so we'll start with the Hall of Famers. So here is the Hugh Jennings, and there is the Eddie Walsh. And you can kind of see on both of those cards, they do have a little bit of back damage on them. So these were previously glued in. No damage was done in the soaking process. They actually just had damage there already. And when I was starting to soak these, you can kind of see this one right here. That was the one that I practiced with to see how the cards would soak. I think this guy may have been one of the ones that was on the back. It was just damaged. But you can kind of see that was my practice just to see how the ink would do. And that was one of the ones that had been torn out of this album. And so then once I saw that, oh, okay, that glue actually did pretty well with the soaking, then I could start moving on. And I started with some of the worst condition ones and then progressively got to the nicer condition cards. So you can see we have the 2 Hall of Famers I covered. Russ Ford, I believe that's who that is. Yeah, Russell Ford for the Yankees. George Gibson, Doc Adkins, Northrup for Louisville. Lee was one that had paper all stuck on the front of it. McAllister for Atlanta, Otto Nab, Birmingham, Bill Raritan. One of my favorite guys from baseball history. I really like Bill Raritan. Larry McLean and Billy Lush. I think he may be one of the ones that was behind. But so as you can kind of see, I know our suspicion was that they were all tin tops to begin with, and you can kind of see that that was in fact the case. So all those cards were Colgan's tin tops. So pretty awesome there. And the half, obviously, that one right there, there's our half. So those are our Colgans. Now we had 3 E121 cards from that collection. And this one was already out and it had the blank back. But kind of a nice little surprise on these 2. The Harry Hooper, obviously it's got some damage and everything like that, but it actually turned out to be Henry Johnson back. So it's a Henry Johnson. So that was pretty fun to find out. And then the Guy Morton, pretty good crease and everything, but it actually turned out to be a standard biscuit. So pretty awesome. I collect all those cards, so I loved finding a little extra treat with the Guy Morton and the Harry Hooper, and I had neither of those in my collection. So pretty excited about that. So let us I'll show you, I'm going to show you that at the end. And I have actually an announcement in this video that overall in this collection, there was a card in this collection that had never been seen before. And so today in this video, I'm showing a ZEENUT card that has never been confirmed up to this point. So probably in addition to the 1919 checklist that we were able to salvage, it's a pretty exciting announcement for any ZEENUT collector to be able to show for the first time a new addition to the checklist. And in this case, it's actually not a new addition to the checklist, but it's one that we suspected existed because on the known checklist, just like we have up here, it was listed, but it had never been seen or confirmed to exist. So we just knew that there was a good possibility that this card existed, and it can now be confirmed. And I'm going to end with that and the checklist. And that's with the 1917 set. So we'll start on kind of the 1921s and kind of go back. And again, I'm going to take my time on this video. If you don't want to watch the whole thing, that's totally cool. So I was able to kind of put the good cards into a holder. And these ones here were just given to me in holders. So those aren't necessarily stars. Someone had attempted to, I think, soak some, and that's how they came. But the stars are Lefty O'Doul, and that soaked out really, really well. And again, it's hard to get zoomed in here. So these 1921s turned out really well. I'm going to end with that one. Sam Crawford was in a little bit rougher shape. That one was in rougher shape in the album, so that's not necessarily super surprising that it would be kind of in rough shape. Patsy Flaherty is he actually went into Hollywood and became a famous actor and was in like 100, 200 movies, something like that. So actually pretty cool guy. Look him up. He's in some pretty cool movies from the 50s, 30s, 40s, 50s and on. So a pretty cool guy there. One of my favorite guys from baseball history is Gavi Kravith, the early home run star. most people don't realize that he has a 1921 ZEENUT card. It was his final card before he retired, and had some controversy and all that kind of stuff. Look up his history. It's pretty awesome. And so pretty cool card. They're tough to find. And one of the tougher 1921 ZEENUT cards is actually the Buzz Artlet. And this is as nice an example of a 1921 Artlet as you will ever see. So pretty awesome. And I think the only reason that ink is on there is because the newspaper that he was printed on, that he was pasted on top of, had some red ink on it. So that kind of got transferred. But that's it. And one of the rarest cards in the collection actually is this. And it's a card that has been sort of one of my white whales for a long time, because I love Ernie Shore. He was Babe Ruth's teammate when they were both young in the league, and pitched that no-hitter where Babe Ruth got kicked out of the game after the first batter for, I think, punching a ref or something crazy like that, or the umpire, and finished the game with a no-hitter, and wasn't awarded a no-hitter because of that. But anyways, pretty cool card. But this card was not known to exist in the Jim Horn book. And so it's one of those cards that my well-loved copy of Jim Horn's book, I have added in the cards that, you know, you can kind of see the, you know, San Francisco players here in 1921. And so on the San Francisco players were all kind of here. I've marked off who I had prior to this collection, and he was not on the list. And so you can see I've kind of penciled him in underneath. So that is one of the newer additions to the overall ZEENUT checklist. And so I am ecstatic to have that card in the collection, because there's less than 3 or 4 known examples of that card in existence, at least currently. And 1921's a tough year. It's a really hard year to complete. They actually found a checklist like this from 1921, and it has several names on there that haven't been confirmed, and Shore was one of them for years, and there's another 10 or 15 that have never been seen. I don't know if they really exist, but there's a chance that they could have. And maybe the print run was just really low and those cards just didn't survive. So kind of one of those exciting years. There could be some additions to the checklist coming, you know, moving forward. But he was one of the 3 most recent additions to that checklist. So super excited to have him. There's some other guys in that 1921 set that seem to be on everybody's want list, and a lot of them are Seattle players. And fortunately, we got quite a few Seattle guys in this collection, and some of them are really, really tough. So I'm really happy to get those. And I'm not going to necessarily go through all of them, but some of the ones that I needed are right here on top. So not Ernie Shore. This guy's name is, I think, Charlie Shore, but with 2 R's. Daly for Seattle, Al DeMarie for Seattle, Morse for Vernon. Some of these guys were just really hard. And this card right here, I know, is on pretty much every 1921 ZEENUT collector's want list. Hale for Portland. So just one of those super duper rare cards. And I mean, you know, a lot of these cards, for example, that one soaked out just absolutely beautifully. So there's no damage to the back of that card. Front of that card looks just amazing. So as clean a card as you could ever expect to find. And you know, if you could do whatever you wanted to this card and there'd be no evidence that it was ever soaked. And so anyways, kind of going through, there's a myriad of different types of conditions of the cards. And so you can kind of see, obviously, same guy, same collection, very different conditions of these cards. So some of these were in much higher grade and kept nicer. Others were, you know, a little bit more damaged. So another Seattle player there, Bates. And I'm pretty sure I needed him too. So most of the Seattle team was in that collection, which is awesome. But again, I'm not going to go through all these. I think I covered quite a bit in my earlier video, kind of going through each individual card on its own. But I just kind of want to show you the overall kind of condition of these cards after the soaking process. And just so that you can kind of see what they look like. But again, these were some of those ones that they were trimmed on the edge of the page soaked out pretty well, look good. So here we go. There's Tubby Spencer. He was in the T206 set. So yeah, some cards just a little bit rougher. And you can kind of see this one right here, for example. Really nice condition from there over, but this was right on the edge, actually the lower corner of the page. So it bore a little bit more of the brunt of just wear over the years. And so it resulted in sort of that funny look. And as that was being soaked, this entire half of the card just had a different color to it. And so it was one of the first cards that I soaked just to kind of see how that would go. Another thing, when you are ever dealing, if you're ever dealing with mildew, this didn't have a lot of mildew, but if you're ever dealing with mildew, be very, very careful soaking something that's had mold growing on it, because a lot of times that mildew will actually break down the cardboard, and you start to soak it and it will just fall apart. So you got to be careful, and even just that friction of just being on the edge of the page did quite a bit of damage to some of these cards, but they soaked out pretty darn well. So again, don't want to kind of tarry too long on any one given set or anything like that. So again, those are the 1921s, and there were 112 1921 cards. So the 1920s is a set. It's one of the more popular sets ever of ZEENUT cards, just because it has that pretty awesome simulated grandstand in the back. So it's always been a little bit more collected, a little bit more expensive than some of the other ZEENUT sets. And it's also more difficult to find than the 1919 set, which from all these years, from 1917 all the way to 21, for whatever reason, I don't know if it was like Happy Days or Here Again, after the war, after the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, but 1919 is the most easy to find and easily completed set of all these bunches. So a little bit more straightforward of a set. Obviously, the limiting factor for the 1919 set is the Fatty Arbuckle. It's just an expensive card. There are some rare cards, tougher cards in that set, but it's for the most part completable as long as you get an Arbuckle. And so anyways, here's our 1921s. Just kind of go through some pretty awesome, that's a pretty awesome catcher pose for that guy for Seattle. But I needed probably a good 30 of these cards. And I was really happy to get them because it had some of the pretty tough ones to find. Some of your Seattle and Portland guys. I think it was Portland in 1920. Yeah, Portland. For whatever reason, the Seattle and Portland guys in 1920 just, you know, not always, but they just tend to be a little bit harder to find than like the Oakland Oaks and the San Francisco Seals. But you got to remember that the Collins McCarthy Candy Company was situated in San Francisco. So they were largely produced and distributed in that area, in the Bay Area. So I don't know that they really released the ZEENUT cards in Seattle and places like that. So a lot of times the Oaks and the Seals tended to survive in greater numbers just because that was the hometown team and that's who people wanted. And we have, you know, kind of evidence from original collectors that nobody wanted teams like Seattle. Nobody wanted the Vernon players or things like that because they weren't popular where they were being distributed. So, you know, Collins McCarthy was a largely Bay Area candy company. And so there's our 1920s. Again, just a super fun year. Probably one of my favorites of all time. If I was to say what is my favorite ZEENUT set of all time, it's a tie probably between the 1912 ZEENUTs and the 1918s. You just can't beat that red border. It's just a beautiful set. And as far as kind of the stars of 1920, it's a little star-free, to be honest with you. Obviously, the big card is the Sam Crawford. And so we got a pretty nice example of that one. Soaked out pretty darn well. No damage. The Buzz Arlett was a little bit rough. It has a pretty good tear, actually, through the card, but really hard card to find in that set. And Buzz Arlett's just always super popular. And then amongst those that collect cards of Jewish baseball players, Sammy Bone is always a really popular one, and that is a really, really hard card to find. So that's most people that collect that niche want this card, and it's on their want list. So anyways, so those are our 1920s, and that'll kind of send us right over to 1919. And there are only 144 cards in the 1919 set, and we got 143 cards. So I haven't really looked to see exactly. I know we basically got the entire 1919 set, and we did get the Arbuckle. And so here is that bunch. Now, 1919s are kind of cool. I'm going to leave these two actually to the side for right now, because I'm going to refer back to them when I talk about the checklist. There's some minor variations within the 1919 set. A lot of these guys, like Tom Seaton here, for example, you can kind of see that little whiteout spot. Some cards can be found with that or that removed, and just some gray filling in that spot. Again, 1919s are a little bit of an easier set. They become, I don't know, they kind of get a little bit drab, you know, to be honest with you. But I like it. It's a fun set because it's completable. One thing I did want to note is that a lot of these cards, they originally had some writing on it, and you can still see the writing, you know, to a degree on some of the cards, but the person didn't write really hard. And during the soaking process, I don't know what type of pencil it was, or if it was just kind of a grease pencil or something like that, but most of the actual pencil markings kind of soaked off. So no attempt was made to remove that, but it just kind of soaked off in the process. So it was probably just written with a kind of different type of ink there. But anyways, here's what 1919 sort of looked like there. And pretty fun set, pretty cool set. And again, if you're ever interested in kind of starting a ZEENUT set, this is probably one of, if you like the earlier cards, one of the go-to sets to start with. Because for the most part, if you're cool not having an Arbuckle, which will set you back quite a bit financially, it's pretty completable. Might take a couple years to kind of find every card, but it's doable. So as far as kind of the better cards in the 1919 set, obviously the big card is the Arbuckle, and that's what we've got here. Again, still on the paper. One of my favorite cards of all time. I mean, you just can't beat that guy with that pose, hamming it up for the camera. Then also knowing the Fatty Arbuckle story and the, you know, the murder charges and his career being destroyed because of the scandal. If you don't know that story, look it up. It's actually fascinating. And anyways, just a really, really great card. And until I got my copy, which is in about the same condition this one in, I think it's graded a 3 or a 4 or something. It was always on my want list. So my brother Reese is going to be pretty excited about that one. But the 1919 set is actually pretty loaded with some pretty great players. So there were 2 copies of Bob Musel in that collection, and he must have been Bob Dunn's, one of his favorite players, because one of the first pages had this card, and then later on there's another example of that card. And there's not much duplication in this album. So he must have been a big fan of the guy that would later become part of Murderer's Row, Bob Musel. And this one was just cool because, again, they forgot to print the sepia highlight for the Falkenberg. And that was actually on the checklist. It was just something that I didn't ever think I would get as a funny little variation. But I have a couple cards known like that, and happy to add that one. And again, just like the 1920, here's the Sammy Bone from the 1919 set. This one's a much, much higher grade than the copy that I had in my collection previous. So super happy to get that, even though there is a little bit of back damage on that. And again, that was done prior to being put into the album. And this is Russell Buzz Arlett's first ever card. So if one was looking for PCL Hall of Famer rookie cards, that's what this one would be. So a really popular card, and Buzz Arlett is a super cool dude in the history of Pacific Coast League baseball. And then we also have, here is Pro Football Hall of Famer Patty Driscoll. And again, this is a really nice example of that from the front. even though it has a little bit of some staining and back issues. And then the biggest card other than the Arbuckle and the other limiting factor in this set is the Dazzy Vance. So this one was on the edge of the page, so it kind of bore the brunt. It was right in the middle, so I think a lot of thumbing through the album kind of did some damage to Dazzy Vance over the years. But it was originally cut kind of funky just like this, so that's kind of how this guy kept the card. Soaked out pretty well and everything, but any example of Dazzy Vance from the 1919 ZEENUT set is great. This one, despite its technical flaws, is a really clean example of that particular card. So pretty cool there. So that will bring us to the 1918s. And this stack is probably the main reason that I wanted this and was pretty much willing to pay whatever it took to get it. Because this is one of my favorite sets of all time. I just love the way these look. They're very, very reminiscent of the T210 or the T210 Old Mill set. And it's just a super cool set. And some of these cards are extremely, extremely rare. I have found personally that for the most part, those guys that are with the Oakland Oaks are the easiest tier of 1918s. And there's a few guys within that set that team that are a little bit tougher, but for the most part, you could complete a 1918 Oakland team set with a fair amount of ease if you're patient. San Francisco, there's some rare guys in that set, but once you get into some of those other teams, especially Vernon and a few of the other ones, really, really hard. Probably single digits known examples of a lot of these cards. But some of these players, I had never even seen them previously. Now, fortunately, about half of the 1918s had really clean backs once they were soaked. And they were not previously in any kind of an album prior to getting into the album that we had. But then the other half of the 1918s were from a previous collection that this Bob Dunn had recycled. And so those cards had quite a bit of back damage on them. And fortunately, most of the stars were in the first half that had the nice backs, but then some of them were damaged. So I'll get into some of those ones that had gotten damaged in a minute here. Elwood Speed Martin. So here's a Walter Mccready, and this is one that had been in an album before. And you can kind of see the damage, really thin in some areas. Just a weak overall card, some ripping and stuff. And a lot of that, again, was just because that had been in an album previous. Even though it looks really great from the front, it's actually a really clean, nice example of a 1918 Mccready from the front. It's on kind of thinned or skin stock just from that. So some of these cards, you know, you take them in whatever condition you can kind of find them in. But, you know, this one more, that's a great pose that I'd never seen before. And I needed that for my set, obviously. So this one, again, has some damage to it, some paper loss on the back. You can feel it when it's in your hand, whether it's kind of thinned or not. But this set, I'm just going to kind of thumb through all of them. I think there's only 82 cards or something like that. So this may be the first time some of these cards are being seen. This guy right here actually passed away that same year in 1918 from the Spanish flu, and he's in the T206 set. So one of the first guys from that set to have passed, but he passed away while playing for Salt Lake in 1918. So this card, one of the rarest guys in the set, Farmer for Salt Lake, and it's ripped a little bit, but again, you take that card in any condition that you can find it in. You know, and if you can upgrade someday, great. If not, oh well. Wharton, same way. This one actually, when it was in the album, had the entire corner folded over. And you can almost not even tell that it was done. Another rare one. And again, just once you get past, so this card is super thin. Super duper thin. And it's just the way that card had been removed from an album and is kind of thin stock. So yeah, some of these cards, like the Vernon players and Some of the other teams are extremely, extremely rare. Chadbourne, Davis. And there's one card in here that I needed for my set. That's Herschel Prow. That actually has a mistake on the date. And so I wanted to kind of show that, because I wasn't even aware that that was the way that that card was, but it is. So that one, the Pepe, I needed. But it was one of the first cards we kind of showed here. See if I can find that again. But the Smith card, don't know where that is. I should have kept it on the top, but I did not. But so with the Smith card, it was, they had mistakenly forgotten to, right here. So if you can kind of see Dobbs, ZEENUT Series 1918 Dobbs, San Francisco. If you look at Smith, they forgot to add the digit 8. So it says ZEENUT Series 191 Smith, Salt Lake. And that actually is the way all the Smith cards from this set are going to be found. But he's an extremely rare guy, so I wasn't even aware of that until after I got it, found another example, saw another example in a picture, and, you know, confirmed that that is the way that those cards were made. Now, as far as kind of the two of the major stars of this entire collection. So we have the Ed Mensor here. Obviously, he's again another one of those players that's of Jewish ancestry, so super popular. But here are the two cards that I was the most excited about personally. So two cards. I actually have an example of the O'Doul, but the corners are trimmed, and this is an obvious upgrade for me. And again, these ones had a little bit of ink on them, or pencil markings. The Crawford did not, but the O'Doul did. I think right down here it said P, but a lot of that pencil just kind of washed right away. So no attempt was made to remove it, but it just kind of washed away. But you can still see the indentation. There's no attempt to defraud or anything. But the Crawford came out pretty nice. You have some initials on the back, and it looks super good. And super happy. This is one of the cards that I've been looking for years, and just didn't know if I was ever going to find an example kind of within my price range that I was going to be happy with as far as the overall aesthetics go. And so probably one of the cards I'm most excited about in this entire collection. And kind of the same with the O'Doul. I had an O'Doul. I wasn't necessarily happy with the overall presentation of that card. So this one's a huge upgrade. And we have a little bit of flaking on the O'Doul. What had happened is when it was in the album, one of the card that was next to it was actually overlapping it. And so by the time it got to me, that card had already been, just through years of kind of thumbing through, glue had sort of pulled off that red already, and it was on the back of that other card. So there was no way to necessarily save that red from having that issue, but it's very non-distracting in my opinion. And again, this one soaked out really well, no back damage or anything like that. So super duper excited about those two cards. And so that brings us to our 1917s. And before I get into the 1917s, I'm going to show you guys the 1919 checklist. And this is the first time this is being shown to anybody. And to my knowledge, and, you know, some of the big PCL guys can totally correct me. I could be wrong. I do not think another example of this is known to exist. So here goes, the first time. And as you can kind of see, it was able to be soaked very cleanly. We have some very, very slight enamel loss right in the middle, right where a card was on top of it. But you can still read very well, you know, kind of what's going on there. But this is that checklist that I had seen previous, only as a 1917 in the Horn book. And that's kind of what I'm showing. Oh, I lost my page. Had it all ready and everything. But so this is the only example of one of those that I had seen, was this 1917 example, and here is a 1919 example, so almost true to size. And anyways, so on this 1917 one, for example, there were a bunch of players that had been listed on the Angels and the Ducks, so that was Portland and Los Angeles, that had never been confirmed to exist before. So here we go with the 1919s. And so obviously we can kind of see with the Tigers there, there's Fatty Arbuckle on the top. So we kind of have our managers and owners and things like that on the top of the list. And then they kind of go down. And I looked up the total number of players in this set, 1919, and there is 144 cards on the known checklist. And on this checklist here, there are 143 shown. Now, there's one guy, Bert Niehoff, who is known in the 1919 set for 2 different teams. And he is known on the LA Angels. There's Niehoff there. But he's also known on the, and this is kind of funny because this is the Seattle team, the Siwashes, which is kind of a derogatory term for a Native American from that area. So not necessarily politically correct terminology here, but that's the Seattle Indians. And so Niehoff was known on the Angels, and he also has a Seattle card. So I'm not sure how that played out during the year. I have a suspicion that he was printed with the Seattle first, Angels second, and by the time August 25th here that they made this checklist, they no longer included him over here, and they included him with his new team. So that would make sense why there would be one less player than the known checklist. But things get a little interesting because there are 2 different cards in the 1919 set that both depict the same player. And that player, it would later go on to play in the major leagues, and his name was Willie Cam. So Willie Cam here, first off, Willie Cam is a very, very distinctive looking individual. And so when they made the Willie Cam card initially, they mistakenly incorrectly listed him as the name Kramer. And so here's Willie Cam, and is very distinctly that is Willie Cam. And so he's listed as Kramer, and then they later corrected and gave him his right name, changed the image for whatever reason. So there's actually 2 different cards of the same player in the 1919 set. Now, when we look at our checklist, and there was a Ray Kramer played on the Oakland Oaks team. And so there is a Kramer on the Oakland Oaks, and there's a Kramer on the Oakland Oaks in the set too. But if we look at the San Francisco Seals, there is Willie Cam is listed right there. But if we're looking at this list, there is no Kramer listed. There's a corner, but there's no Kramer. So they had taken Kramer off of the list and listed Cam. So that would mean that there should be 142 cards on this list, which leaves one big question mark for this particular set. On this list, there's a card that has never been found. And if we're looking at this list, and I looked through my cards, and I did not get it in this collection, so I can't, that's not the card that I got. But if we're looking at the Oakland Oaks team here, all these cards are known to exist except for Hack Miller. So a 1919 ZEENUT for the Oakland Oaks, Hack Miller, that card right there has never been found, and it may yet exist. And if it does, it would be by far the rarest 1919 ZEENUT. So keep your eyes open. If you find a 1919 Miller for Oakland, that's an extreme, extreme rarity. And I know I would be super interested in it. I know probably Mark and a bunch of the other PCL crazy guys would all be interested in it, because that card up to right now, me showing you this checklist, I don't think there was any suspicion that it had been produced, nor has it ever been confirmed to have been produced. So that's kind of an exciting find. Keep your eyes open for a 1919 Miller for Oakland. So that leads us back to the 1917s. And we got a lot of 1917s in this collection, but the vast majority of them were trimmed pretty significantly. And trimmed so bad that it no longer had the player name or anything like that. It was just trimmed to the actual player, as you can kind of see here. So here's a complete guy in the back there. And I think that's Schaller. The original collector had written, yeah, Schaller. So there he is. That's how most of the 1917s in that album were found. But we only got 18 complete cards in this collection. And you can kind of see the ones that we got here. Fritz Meisel, Mccready. Some of these were in somewhat rougher condition. But we got crazy, incredibly lucky. Because the individual that decided to cut up all these the 1917 cards spared a couple of them for us. And so we have a pretty rough condition Frank Chance. This was his last card ever. And Frank Chance was a California guy, came back after his major league career was over. But always a popular one. Not that hard of a card to find. And we've got of Black Sox fame, and kind of just an awesome card. He just looks shady in there. I mean, literally shady. But that's Sleepy Bill Burns, you know, of Black Sox fame. So always a popular card. I needed it. This one's a little bit rougher than I would like, but I'll take it. And then again, same guy, Ed Mensor of Jewish heritage. So always, again, another popular player. Which kind of leads us to our last two players. Okay, now I'm going to talk a little bit about these two, because this is a pretty exciting find for the hobby. And so on that 1917 checklist that we had from the Jim Horn book, there were 7 cards on this list that at the time this book had been produced had never been seen. And there were 4 guys for Los Angeles and 3 guys for Portland. And those players I had listed here with yellow. And I personally had seen a Vaughn, so I didn't have him as yellow. So there were 7 guys at the time this book was made in the 1970s that had never been seen. So for Los Angeles, it was Hall, Fournier, Terry, Vaughn. Portland, it was Baldwin, Wiley, and Harstead. So through talking with some guys in the hobby, I had seen Vaughn. I knew he was confirmed to have existed, and confirmed to exist only 1 or 2 known copies of Terry, Wiley, and Vaughn. So of those 7, only those 3 had really been confirmed. And if you look at any big PCL collector, they need those 7 guys. Okay, a few guys have 1 or 2 here or there, but nobody has all 7 of those, because 4 of the 7 have never been seen. So one of those players was found in this collection. So here we have for Portland, the 1917 Portland Denny Wiley. So there's that card. Again, that was one of those cards that was confirmed to exist in either a single or maybe 2 copies total known to exist. So super duper excited. Very similar to that 1921 Ernie Shore card that has been on my want list and desired card list forever. This card is one of the first known copies of this card to surface. So of the 18 cards from 1917, to have one of them be one of those players that everybody's looking for is unprecedented. Awesome, amazing. But it doesn't stop there. So for the first time ever, 1917 ZEENUT set for the Los Angeles Angels, the 3 players that had never been confirmed, or actually 2 players that had never been confirmed, because we found Terry, I've never seen it, and Vaughn, Hall and Fournier. And here is, for the first time ever, the 1917 ZEENUT of Jack Fournier. So that can now be added to, or officially to, the checklist. And for those that are hunting for the set, it has been confirmed. And we actually got a pretty decent example of that. So really, really excited about that card. You just don't get to find things like that very often that confirm a theory or a suspicion that's been around in the hobby for, 50, 60 years. So just an awesome overall collection. I could not be more ecstatic. They soaked out amazing. Everything I possibly could have hoped for was in that collection. And it's just, You know, it's one of this collection is, you know, to say once in a lifetime is probably underplaying it. It's just a great, awesome find. And I'm so happy. I'm so happy that it found its way to me. And I'm really excited that, you know, or I'm just really grateful that the original collector, Bob Dunn, took the time to kind of place these in that album, took the time to love these cards and allow them to have survived to today. Because otherwise, this little slice of history would have been lost forever. And so many collections just like this didn't survive. So this survived. I guess it was probably put together after World War I, but it survived the paper, you know, drives of World War II. It survived 100 years until today. And here we are, and we get to enjoy the cards. I hope all of you guys enjoy this little trip down memory lane with these baseball cards. This is what makes this hobby so fun. I love vintage cards. I love finding out about these guys. To me, I get as much enjoyment out of the nobodies and the unknown players as I do the stars. But thank you guys so much for stopping by. Stars of the Diamond, if you guys have any questions, let me know. Leave comments down below. Thanks everybody for the support I've gotten. We've gotten up over 100 subscribers already. And I really am going to try to be better about uploading videos, but this has been pretty much dominating my non-work life, you know, for the last 3 to 4 weeks. And it's been totally awesome, and I love every minute of it. And thank you guys so much, and happy collecting.